Hi, Michelle Glass here. We are ready to finish up our conversation about the cardiovascular system. We are still pulling information from our chapter 21. The topic for this video is the central regulation. So of course that means neural, our nervous system and endocrine systems are involved here. Central regulation of both blood pressure and blood volume. This is going to be a negative feedback loop, so we will see that if our blood pressure and blood volume get too high, we're going to do some actions to bring it down low. If our blood pressure and blood volume are too low, we're going to take some actions to bring it back up. So let us get started. In our first scenario, we are going to be looking at what is going to happen if our blood pressure and our blood vessel, excuse me, blood pressure and blood volume are too high. So we're going to take some action to bring it down low. So what we see happening here is when your blood pressure is high and your blood volume is high, you're going to be stretching your cardiac muscle cells of your heart, and that will cause your heart cells, your cardiac muscle cells, to release a hormone. Remember, it's a secondary endocrine organ. So the heart will release natriuretic peptides. We can abbreviate these as either ANP or BNP. These peptides are going to talk to your kidney and also your blood vessels. So when we see natriuretic peptides released, we're going to see that the kidney is going to get rid of extra sodium and extra water. So we're going to see the sodium ion and the water being lost or excreted with the urine. So you're going to have a high volume of urine here being produced. Now, why sodium? Remember, based on our principles of osmosis, basically where the sodium goes, the water goes. So if you have a lot of sodium in your bloodstream, that's going to pull a lot of water into your bloodstream, increasing the blood volume. So by getting rid of the sodium, we are going to ultimately be reducing our blood volume. And reducing, of course, our amount of water also reduces blood volume. We will see the blood vessels will dilate. So vasodilation is talking about making that vessel larger. When you make that vessel larger, you're reducing the blood pressure. It's easier for that blood to move through. We also see that the natriuretic peptides will reduce your thirst. So not only are you getting rid of extra liquid, but you don't desire to take on extra fluid. We also will see that antidiuretic hormone, or ADH, production declines. ADH makes you keep water in the body, and we need to get rid of extra water. We also see that the amount of aldosterone will decrease. Aldosterone makes you retain sodium, which we want to get rid of. So those two hormones are basically shut off. And then also epinephrine and norepinephrine levels are reduced. So we've seen that they are involved in increasing heart rate. We've seen they're involved in increasing contractility of the cardiac muscle. We see them involved in vasoconstriction. And so you need to slow down the heart rate. You need to, reduce the contractility because you're reducing your blood flow. You need to dilate your vessels instead of constricting your vessels. So you'll see a reduction of the epinephrine and the norepinephrine released. So when we see that our water and sodium leaves the body with the urine, that's decreasing blood volume. When we see peripheral vasodilation, that's decreasing blood pressure. And then our roles of all of those reduction of thirst, reduction of ADH, reduction of aldosterone, reduction of epinephrine and norepinephrine, that's going to help reduce collectively blood volume and blood pressure. And when all of these things happen together, then you would expect to bring your blood volume and your blood pressure back to normal. Now, in this case, we're not talking about a super extreme scenario that's causing intervention through medication. We're just talking about, maybe you've had a lot to drink, a big meal, and drank your gallon of water for the day or whatever. And so you've just increased your bodily fluids, and that might be all it takes to increase your blood volume type of thing. So we're just looking at these little slight adjustments that your body should be doing all of the time. Let's take this scenario and say, hey, our blood pressure and blood volume was elevated. The heart released natriuretic peptides. It returned it to normal, but it did such a great job, it actually took it below normal. So how is the body going to return our blood pressure and blood volume to normal? Or maybe we've been so busy today and we haven't had a chance to really take anything to drink. So our blood volume is just a little bit lower than it should normally be. How are we going to make those adjustments? Okay, so here it's a bigger, more events. Okay, so we need more of our paper to dedicate our notes here. There's going to be a short-term and a long-term response here. So in the case of our short-term response, we will see baroreceptors. We mentioned them already as pressure receptors, so they're detecting that our blood pressure is low. If your blood pressure is low, we do see that the sympathetic division is going to automatically respond with the release of epinephrine and norepinephrine. We know that these hormones and neurotransmitters can increase our heart rate. We know that they can increase the contractility of the heart. They can also constrict our blood vessels. So just by constricting the blood vessel, you are increasing your blood pressure even if you haven't changed your blood volume. So here we see we're boosting our blood pressure using our existing volume of blood, and we're increasing the activities at the heart in order to more effectively pump that blood and move that blood through the systemic circuit. So these two activities, the release of epinephrine and norepinephrine to increase heart rate and vasoconstriction, will be enough to here initially increase our cardiac output and our blood pressure. Then we need to see our long-term activities to really help fix the problem. So we're going to see our kidney involved here again. Our kidney is going to be releasing our EPO. This is a hormone we've already talked about when we talked about erythropoiesis. So EPO, remember, stands for erythropoietin. EPO is going to talk to the myeloid stem cells and trigger an increase in erythropoiesis. So we're going to see more pro-erythroblasts, and then they're going to be converting into erythroblasts and so forth until we get more red blood cells. So if our blood volume is low, one of the things we need to do is increase our number of blood cells, right? That's pretty obvious. Then we also see that the kidney is releasing a hormone called renin. Now we're going to be talking about renin quite a lot this semester, so you can see that it's highlighted here. It's something that we super duper need to know. What we see is that renin is produced by the kidney. Now the kidney has a group of cells called juxtaglomerular cells, or juxtaglomerular complex. Juxtaglomerular is a single word. We will talk about this more as we get into the kidney, so you'll see it again. Those group of cells are the endocrine cells of the kidney. So both EPO and renin are being released by those juxtaglomerular cells. Now the renin is released by the kidney, and it's going to cause the activation of angiotensin 1, which is already in circulation. Angiotensin 1 doesn't really do anything. Angiotensin 1 is going to be then converted to angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 is the big hormone on the job. It's going to be the one that really gets things done. Now notice I have A.C.E. on the arrow in between angiotensin 1 and angiotensin 2. You see it? This stands for angiotensin converting enzyme. It's abbreviated A.C.E. You've heard before of ACE inhibitors. That's a medication that can be prescribed when you're having trouble regulating your blood pressure. Angiotensin 1 is converted to angiotensin 2 with the assist or help from angiotensin converting enzyme. Now it's the angiotensin 2 that's going to do all the stuff. The angiotensin 2 is going to talk to the neurohypophysis. Remember, that's that posterior lobe of the pituitary gland. And it's going to trigger the release of ADH, antidiuretic, that's one word, hormone, ADH. We've already talked about it a little bit in the endocrine system. Okay, angiotensin 2 also talks to the adrenal cortex. At the adrenal cortex, we're going to see the release of aldosterone. That's one of our corticosteroids, meaning a lipid-derived hormone released by the adrenal cortex. We've talked about it just real briefly also in the endocrine chapter. So angiotensin 2 is giving us the release of ADH from neurohypophysis and the release of aldosterone from the adrenal cortex. And we also see that angiotensin 2 is going to trigger some more neural responses. It's going to keep the sympathetic division releasing epinephrine and norepinephrine. So it's going to make that short-term response a long-term response. And it's also going to increase thirst. So that's the opposite of what we saw a few minutes ago when our blood pressure was too high. So now that our blood pressure and blood volume is too low, we're going to feel thirsty. So we start increasing our fluid intake. Now let's look more at what happens with the ADH and the aldosterone. ADH first. ADH stands for antidiuretic, that's one word, hormone. Antidiuretic hormone is going to talk to the kidney. It's going to tell the kidney to keep that water, retain the water, reduce your water loss. So water is going to be reabsorbed into the bloodstream. So you're going to have a limited amount of concentrated urine when you have ADH released. All of that fluid is staying in the body, or as much as possible. ADH also causes vasoconstriction, so we'll see that being perpetuated here. Aldosterone also talks to the kidney and tells the kidney, retain the sodium. So now sodium is going back into the bloodstream. So we have ADH retaining water, and we have aldosterone retaining sodium. Again, why sodium? Just remember, where sodium goes, water follows. So we're increasing the osmolarity of our blood. So that's going to cause more fluid to move into the blood, and that's going to increase our blood volume. So now we can see, when we look back up here, I know I made it tiny. So we had the reduction of ADH and the reduction of aldosterone. That's because they are doing the opposite of what we want to have happen. We need to excrete sodium, so we have to stop the release of aldosterone. We need to get rid of the extra water, so that's why we have to stop the release of ADH. Okay, and because there's really no angiotensin 2, that's why our thirst is decreased, that's why our ADH is decreased, that's why our aldosterone is decreased, that's why the epinephrine and the norepinephrine levels are decreased. So because you don't get the release of renin, you pretty much shut down this whole line of activities in the case of an elevated blood pressure and blood volume. Let's go back to looking at what's happening here when our blood pressure and blood volume is too low. So we see the release of epinephrine and norepinephrine increasing cardiac output and blood pressure. We see the release of EPO increasing our number of red blood cells. We see angiotensin 2 making us thirsty, so we're taking on more fluid. We see angiotensin 2 triggering the release of ADH and aldosterone, which causes us to retain water and retain sodium. So when we look at all of these activities together, we're increasing our blood volume and increasing our blood pressure, returning back to normal. Okay, guys, that's it.